So when starting a plan drawing of a project, what you're going to want to do, I use a 2H pencil to draw some lines to divide up my sheet because I know I'm going to have a plan, but I'm also going to have elevations of the building. Now I use a 2H because that allows me to get what are essentially layout lines, which are very light. I don't want those to be the focus of my sheet of drawings. And I'm going to divide this sheet into roughly thirds. And you can do that in any number of ways. You could fold the paper, you could measure it, or you could just kind of eye it. And you can see, using my best line drawing technique, I can divide this sheet up into thirds, or at least something that's pretty close. When you're hand drawing, again, as I said, you don't need to be perfect, but what you do need to be is consistent. So I'm going to start, and as I also mentioned, I'm left-handed, so I'm a smudge machine. So I am going to start with my border, not the spiral bind, but the hard border on the left. If you're right-handed or less prone to smudging, you might start with the other end. Now, studying that project, I'm looked at it and discovered that basically the roof is essentially a square. So I'm going to draw a square. Oh, except I want to take my B pencil, lay out a square. Now, how do you know that you're drawing a square? Well, the one thing you can do is shoot for an even distance from your edge, if your edge of your border is a square. The other thing you can do is to try to estimate where you think the diagonals are going to be. I find that when I see the diagonals, that helps me read the geometry. And of course, it's just part of training your eye as you draft. Now, this is the outline of the building, and I'm going to use my B pencil to draw in a couple of the other elements. The roof line is right in the middle of the roof. Well, the middle of the roof can be found either by intersecting these two diagonals or just by kind of estimating. I find I close one eye, which I am not going to reach under and show you, but that helps me to see the middle of the drawing. Either way, sometimes I will make two tick marks. That's what those little lines are called, in order to guide my pencil as I draw. And I'll just draw that roof line. So you can see here I've got the starts of a drawing. I also noticed there was a walkway. I'll draw that in here. And then I noticed that there's a tree off to the side. And for a tree, I can just draw a kind of squiggly line to represent the outline of the tree. Now that's a fairly, exciting drawing, right? Well, not really. It's actually pretty boring. One thing we can do, and one thing we should do, is take to heart my notion that each drawing should have 3 distinct line weights. Now in this case, the outline of the building is the one which we want to really emphasize. So I've drawn my layout lines using a lighter pencil. I'm going to draw the outline of the building using my heavy 4B pencil. And you can see how there's kind of a hierarchy beginning here of the outline of the building being more distinct because it's a heavy line weight. And then this middle part of the building, the ridge line or the outline of the walkway, as less distinct. Okay, they are a medium line weight. Now there's other things we can draw, and those detail items we typically draw with our 2H pencil. So for example, let's say there's some kind of paving here. Perhaps we can draw that with a light line weight. Now of course I don't think there's actually any paving in the model. We could do the same with roofing. If there was roofing, we could draw those. And again, I'm showing you a bad habit by drawing without pulling my wrist down. Now, sometimes we don't draw all of the material. So you see how I can just kind of fade off the lines for the roofing without having to draw them all. And that indicates a light line indicates that that is a finished material. There's a few other things that we could draw. The big one is, well, where are the actual walls? If you look at the picture of the image, there's a little bit of an overhang on the roof. The eave sticks out a bit. So I could draw with a dashed line, and I think I'm going to use a medium weight line weight, and draw a dashed line. You can see how that line reads relatively well. I think I'm using the wrong pencil, but that's okay. And this is a way to show something that is hidden by other drawing elements. And in fact, the technical term is a hidden line, is a dashed line. Now that we have this lovely floor plan, let's draw some exterior elevations. And when you are sketching a project, a building of any sort, or even just a room, when you start with the plan, you want to use that plan, the one you've already figured out all the proportions. You want to use that to generate the exterior elevation and the interior elevations as need be. What I mean by that is I've already got the width of the building here with these dashed lines. I can draw down some of my construction lines. I can even draw down the ridge line here. And I can now start using that width as my project here. And I'll start by adding in a ground line. That's the plane of the ground where it sits. And I should probably make that parallel to the bottom of the paper. And then, how tall is this building? Well, if you study the picture, it's about as tall as it is wide. It's kind of a square. So I can use this dimension. I can literally measure it using a pencil. And as mentioned, you want to shoot for something that looks kind of like a square, which that does. As far as the angle of the roof, well, there are sort of standard angles of roofs that are 9 and 12 or 7 and 12 or whatever it is, but I'm going to just guess that it's about 45. So that's about halfway up. So right about there, and then I can kind of lay out the lines. Now, once I've done that, I'm going to take my medium pencil and I'll draw the outline. You'll notice that there's a little bit of a foundation overhang. I'll draw that in. I'll draw in the roof. Now, of course, the roof has a thickness. I'm just going to have to estimate the thickness of that. And then in the rafters there with a square cut. And here's my building. Now, I should note that at one point here, there is a door on this south side. And again, you want to make sure you kind of picture what this is going to look like. This symbol here indicates a exterior elevation. I'm going to put a little S in there to indicate south, just to remind me what I'm looking at. And I want to remember that there's a door right here, and it's kind of in the middle, so I'll have to draw it down from the center of the ridge, and then I can draw the width of the door. Finally, I can complete the elevation by drawing the foundation line right there. Now, as mentioned, there are multiple line weights in every drawing. One thing about elevations that's unique is that you want to emphasize the outer perimeter. And this is actually true for a lot of drawings. Oops, I grabbed the wrong one. You want to emphasize the outer perimeter by using a heavy line. And I'll just do that here. And you can correct any mistakes you might have made by going over it with this new line weight. Finally, you want to draw in the ground line. This is where the building hits the ground. And then show how that ground plane, I usually draw it as a slight angle sloping away from the building. And that is your south elevation. If there are any things like details, you can draw those in with the lightest line weight using your 2H. For example, if there were any trim around this door, I could draw that like so. That's your south elevation. Now, if you want to draw the north elevation, That's the one facing opposite here. Where's my B pencil? That's the one facing in this direction. Probably the easiest thing to do is just turn your whole notebook around and draw the north elevation. You'll want to do it using the same principles. You'll notice that I leave all the construction lines in while I'm drawing my elevation, and that's fine. Those kind of show how you generated the drawing, and it helps you to show how all the drawings are related, the faces of the building. Now, drawing this east elevation is a little more tricky when you actually go to draw it, and the reason is that the roof line, we're no longer looking at the familiar angled portion, the gabled portion. We're looking at the ridge here from the side. So it's going to look a little more funny. Let me show you what I mean by casting down the lines and then drawing the elevation. As you can see, there are no other details on this elevation, and it looks kind of funny. This section of the roof we know is sloped away from us, so that this is farther than this point. And there are some details, I suppose, like the fascia board here. But beyond that, it's kind of funny looking to think that that's what the roof looks like. This is an important part of drawing orthographic drawings, is that elevations will foreshorten the elements that are angled away from the picture plane. And this is just like when you draw a perspective. Things that are farther away appear smaller. In this case, they aren't smaller, they appear flattened and somewhat distorted. Let's finish up by drawing the last elevation. Now, you'll notice in this drawing, there's a couple funny things. First of all, there's a tree in the way, blocking our view. So we don't want to draw lines behind that tree. The other thing is that I have drawn the base of the tree ever so slightly forward of the foundation line, and that is just kind of a graphical trick to indicate that the tree is not plastered against the side of the building, but is actually spatially forward in plan. And there you have it. You have your 4 views, very nice and neat, and this is a great way to study any building or interior elevation. One difference with interior elevations is that instead of being taken from the exterior of the building, they are taken from the inside, so they fold open like this, instead of in this case where it's the building folded up like this. Lastly, you're going to want to label your site plan in a number of different ways. I've already drawn in a north arrow, and I've also indicated exterior elevations with these little elevation symbols, and I wrote S and N and W and E, although I think I've reversed those, just to indicate the directions. I've also put a title on each drawing. Now, I'm probably going to eventually use these drawings on some kind of electronic file format, so I'll put text in there, but to keep my notebook clear so I know what I'm looking at, I put them in here also. Also, it's a good idea to put in today's date and some kind of title. I'm just going to call this little fella Boxy House. This same technique that we just used to draw the site plan and the exterior elevations, that technique can be used to work on the interior of a project, of really any room that you're inside. Here's our project, and this is actually a view from above, looking down at the inside. Here's the door, here's the back window, and you'll notice that south is still down, north is still up. Well, we can draw this floor plan. The only trick is that we're going to have to estimate the interior, the wall thickness from the interior as opposed to the outside, because when you draw a floor plan, as opposed to a site plan, you do have to draw the thickness of the walls. Drawing a plan from the inside of a project is a little different, and let's pretend we didn't have that outside view. We'd have to start with the inside. Now I've drawn some reference lines here. I know this project is a square, and you can see I've got it drawn here. There's a few things that I also know. One is that there's a door over here, and I'm going to draw two lines to represent the either side of the door. Same back here, I know that there's a window over on this back wall, and that they're about the same length from the corner. Now I also can draw my interior walls, and this is basically when you're sitting inside a building or a room, you can tell the shape of the room pretty easily. And this is kind of what you can see. You can also see the glass. Now this is the graphic standard for a simple window, is basically an opening with a single line in the middle. Sometimes you will see a very light line representing the window sill on either side, but that's just a graphics sort of thing. Same here with the door sill. There can be lines representing that, but typically you do represent the door, which is right here, as a rectangle. It should be the same width as the opening, and then I use a nice light line to draw dashes that represent the swing of the door. So whether or not the door is open when you're sitting there, you still have to draw it as if it was open. And there are some flourishes. You could draw it at 45 degrees, but that's the basic idea. Now, the one tricky thing that we don't usually do is we have to draw something that we can't see from the inside, which is the outer wall. Now, there are some easy kind of rules of thumb you can use when you're sketching like this. An exterior wall, probably going to be 8 inches, maybe a foot, depending on what type of building. The interior partitions are going to be about 5 inches. So I'm not really drawing this to scale. I'm just going to draw these as kind of thick boxes. Okay, and again, I've drawn in my reference lines to help me out. The other thing, now that we've got our floor plan, we can still draw in that north arrow in case we haven't done it. Here's a different style of north arrow that I'm going to draw. What you'll also notice, by the way, as I draw is sometimes I squiggle my lines, and that's an old hand drawing technique that helps you get consistency. It's kind of a trick of what they call stochastic resonance, where you add a little bit of irregularity and somehow that makes it seem more regular. But anyway, now we want to draw our interior elevations. Now with interior elevations, the trick is going to be you don't draw from the outside wall, you draw from the inside wall. And I'm just going to project one of my construction lines up from that inside wall, and then I can go as I did before. I know that the ground has got to start somewhere, and then the height of this thing, it's going to be a square. I also know that there is a roof that comes up from the middle of this project that's at roughly a 45. So I've laid out construction lines to help me draw the interior elevation. Now when you draw interior elevations, it's very important that the outline be as dark as possible. And this is going to be your heaviest line weight, the ones in floor plan that we used when we drew the ground. Okay, so there's my nice heavy outline. I can also use projected lines to draw the window. And again, I know that this distance is going to be the same as from the top, so I can draw in some reference lines to help me there. Now to draw the outline of the window, you're going to want to use a medium line weight. Okay, any major element in the space is going to want to have a medium line weight. Now, let's say you have something like a wall base against the wall. You can draw that with the lightest line weight. That's going to be your third line weight, or let's say there was some trim around the window, or even a nice big sill at the bottom. So again, every drawing has these 3 line weights. The big difference with this interior elevation, as mentioned, is that you are drawing from the inside of this wall. The other thing is there's no ground line. The interior elevation just kind of sits there. So you can use this same technique to draw the other interior elevations. Again, this one was facing this way. We're going to want to draw interior elevations facing each way. And this one, if I were to title it, I would title it the north elevation. A few funny things to notice about these side elevations. Well, one funny thing really is that this ceiling we know is sloped, right? It kind of comes at us at an angle so that this is kind of right overhead. In interior elevation, just like in exterior elevation, that view is flattened. If we had any trim up high, you would have to show that trim, but basically it looks kind of funny at first glance. Also notice that I'm using a medium line weight here to discern the kind of fold from the wall to the ceiling. I'm also using a light line weight here for the wall base, and I'm doing that with all of my views. If you take a look at this view here, the elevation, one funny thing about it is that the door has a dashed arrow on it. That dashed arrow indicates the swing of the door in elevation. Now, often you can draw in something like a door handle, which would also help. But either way, the arrow points at the hinges. And that is how you can draw an interior view. You can take the estimate of the floor plan, guess at the thickness of the walls, draw in any windows and doors, and then you can project the interior elevations using basically the same techniques of aligning with the plan and estimating the proportions as you go. So to sum up what we've learned, it's very easy to sketch a simple site plan using the proportions of the building as well as you can estimate. And once you have that plan, you can generate or project the elevations, the exterior elevations, for each direction, north and south, east and west. For interior elevations, it's basically the same process. You're going to want to estimate the shape of the space, the basic square in this case, and any location of elements in that space. And there are graphic standards which we have learned about representing, say, windows and doors, and of course walls. And then you can use the same process to project interior elevations, and now all of these drawings work together. We could probably cut these out of the paper and fold them up to form that interior space, or in this case, fold them up and put them together to form a box that makes our cute little house.